Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala wa ba'd. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Whoever takes a path in search of knowledge, Allah eases the path of Jannah for them." We welcome you all to the third episode of SaalikCast, where we ask Allah to make us all from those who take the path of knowledge, and thus the path of Jannah is made easy for us. To proceed, in this episode, we will be talking with Shaykh Uthman Khan, who is based in Edmonton, and asking him about his experiences seeking and teaching Islamic knowledge alongside studying nutrition and health. Shaykh Uthman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Today, I, Aris, will be interviewing you with brothers Zaid and Yahya. We'd like to start off with this episode by asking you, what is the number one ayah that had an impact on your life and the way you viewed the world?
It's a loaded question. There's actually no verse that connects with me that sticks out more than any other verse. It depends on the situation that I'm in. Yesterday I was in the hospital and I was thinking about wisdom, like wisdom, typical. What is wisdom? And then I just started reading the verses of Surat Luqman. And then, so yesterday, those verses resonated with me. Let's think of another time. A few weeks ago, the verses on Ruh, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي on the soul, because I was looking into it. I was trying to understand concepts on the soul and stuff, and then all of a sudden those verses resonated with me. So there's actually no individual verse that would be considered as a favorite verse for me. I find that a little bit bad, though, if I was to think that was a favorite verse for me, because honestly, the whole Quran is just so deep and it's miraculous, right? But yeah, that's it depends depends on my mood, I guess, and what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, so Shaykh Uthman, to start off this interview, just so we can get a better picture of who you are and how we can connect to your experiences growing up as youth, we'd like to ask you to provide us with, like, to the level of comfort. You don't have to go into all the details, but just like a summary of your childhood and teenage years, and like, were you always practicing, or what got you practicing? What got you interested in seeking knowledge? Perhaps, like, was it your parents who encouraged you to memorize the Quran, or someone else, or like sort of like the beginning stages of your journey?
Well, the beginning stages of my journey, it's interesting. I grew up in a traditional household, conservative traditional household, and being part of a conservative traditional household means it's like following the traditional Islam is a part of our life, right? So we're praying, we're reading Quran. When I was 11, I went to boarding school, started to memorize. And then after that, then memorize the Quran. I finished memorizing when I was 14 years old. And I started studying Islamic studies. I actually did the Alim course completely. It's like the Dars Nidami Alim course. I did the whole thing from beginning to the end. Finished probably year 2000 or something. This was a long time ago. And then after that, I went and I got 2 master's degrees in Islamic studies. So I went to Western universities and I got like 1 master's degree, which was an equivalency that I got transferred over from the Alim program, and then after that I got a 2nd master's degree. So my educational upbringing was traditional, and my educational output now is very academic.
So to break down these terms, I know there are 3 terms you've used before, which are traditional, academic, and classical.
Yeah.
What's your definition for these different terms?
I put a blog post on Facebook. I think it is published by Critical Loyalty with the 10 major differences between traditional and classical. But to put it in very easy language, traditional means anything. Well, you see, when the Prophet ﷺ, while he was there, fiqh wasn't codified. Even the Quran wasn't put into book form, right? It wasn't codified. Hadith wasn't codified. All of these, everything codified happened after the death of the Prophet. It's impossible to codify the Quran during the time of the Prophet because he was receiving the revelation, so you can't really put it together. It can only happen after. So the term traditional, so you have the term traditional basically means anything post codification that reflects on the codification. So for example, I need to pray Salah a particular way. So if you're following a school of thought, like a madhab, then you would be considered a traditionalist, because you're focused and you're doing justice to codification. If you're talking classical, then you're predating codification. You're going before codification. You're basically looking at it a lot earlier than when things were codified. So when we're looking at a lot earlier than when things are codified, it can become a little bit more open. For example, after codification, there was less room for difference of opinion. Like I could differ with you, you could differ with me, but it would have to be within the circle of the tradition. And then on the other hand, before codification, there's more room for difference of opinion. I can differ with you, you can differ with me, and it can be completely weird differences, and it was totally acceptable. So that's the difference in classical. Classical means predating the tradition and going before that, which is a specialty of mine, which is kind of what I look at and what I research. Tradition is what you would learn in Islamic schools, Islamic studies, alim courses. Alim courses are all focused on the tradition. It's like we're going to teach you fiqh. Over here, we're like, well, let's look at what happened before fiqh. How did fiqh come into existence? What actually took place? So, I'll give you an example here. The traditional approach would be prayer is very ritualistic. You got to stand up, do ruku, do sajda, right? Who cares how it's done? The classical approach would be the guy came to the mosque and he prayed quickly, and the Prophet ﷺ said, pray again, you haven't prayed. So why didn't he pray? Well, the reason he didn't pray was because he wasn't doing things slowly. So within the tradition, for me, for example, as a traditionalist, if someone's praying fast, I can find room for allowing it. Like they'll be like, is my prayer done? I'll be like, yeah, sure, you did your ruku, you did your sajda, you're good to go. From a classical approach, I'll be like, nope, not done, do it again. So you have major differences like that. So even when I'm teaching prayer to my children, like I was teaching I was teaching my daughter how to do the 2 sajdas. And, you do 2 sajdas every rak'ah, right? So then you do 1 sajda. And then I was explaining to her why you need to sit down between 2 sajdas. And the reason you need to sit down between 2 sajdas is because you need to differentiate both sajdas. Otherwise, imagine going in sajda, you don't sit down all the way to go down to the second sajda. That's basically like doing 1 sajda without creating a differentiating point in between. So you're gonna have to do 1 sajda, sit down. Do another sajda, sit down. You create 2, right? So that's that's more of a classical approach, where it's more the spirit of things compared to a ritualistic aspect behind, okay, you're supposed to do this. So from a classical point of view, there's a lot of things that will not be allowed in my house in regards to like prayers and zakat and fasting and this and that, which would be completely allowed in a traditional household. But also, flip situation, there'll be certain things, many things probably that happen in my household that would not be allowed in a traditional household at all. Which, I'm not going to elaborate, I'm not going to talk about that. But just to give you an idea, we talk about classic and traditional. What was the other word that you talked about?
Academic.
Academic is just the study. Academic is the study of the tradition, or the study, basically researching all of this. So you can be an academic traditionalist, you can be an academic classical scholar, you can be whatever it is that you want to be.
And then Shaykh Uthman, going back to your childhood experiences, were you brought up in an Islamic school environment or a public school environment?
Initially, my initial studies was in a public school, and eventually I went to a religious boarding school. So when I went to a religious boarding school, it wasn't actually an Islamic school per se, but you can kind of align it on that path, because it was a boarding school where they taught memorization, where they taught the alim course, and yeah.
And was that Islamic school or the boarding school in Canada?
England.
In England. Was this the same institution you went to for the Alamiya degree, or
Yeah.
was that separate?
The same.
And that was after you graduated from high school?
No, before.
Okay, so then how does the system work? When do you start your studies there? And is it congruent with completing a high school diploma?
So the academic studies, we're talking like maths and sciences, they unfortunately back then, I don't know how it is now, but there was not much emphasis. There was more emphasis on learning Islam, less emphasis on learning academics. So the bulk of my high school and all of that I needed to do on my own, because a lot of the emphasis of a lot of these traditional seminaries was learn religion, academics doesn't matter. The only academics that matter maybe is mathematics, that only so much that you need to know. Maybe some language arts that you can talk, and science is all weird anyway, so you don't need to know any science. And like basically all academics tends to be secondary compared to compared to religious studies. So if anyone wanted to get into religious studies, they would have needed to study on their own. There's more emphasis coming up right now, probably, but they would have needed to study on their own and kind of complete their diplomas and all of that on their own. So when I went to boarding school, we had to do it together, but honestly, it would not be at the same level as any just regular high school, etc. You cover the core subjects that you need to, but I personally feel like there should be a lot more coverage done, and also feel like religious education should I also don't feel like religion needs to be taught as it is taught nowadays.
And Shaykh Uthman, was it your decision to go to that boarding school?
No. I didn't know anything better because I was 11, 12 years old, right? So I can't really make no decisions on my own. But but my parents sent me there. And
how did you view it initially? Were you excited, optimistic, or were you kind of sad or disappointed?
Well, because I was 12 years old, I didn't know what to view of it. But unfortunately, when you are that young, there's a lot of indoctrination that happens. Indoctrination happens from a really young age. So if you tell someone that eating this is good for you, and you feed it to them from the time they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, by the time they're 12 years old, they think that's what it is. I've seen, and I get a lot of hate for this, but I am controversial, so oh well. I've seen a lot of people. I was listening to a lecture, and one person said, the best thing that happened to me was when my teacher beat me up when I didn't know my sabak. And I was like, that's like the worst thing to happen to anyone. And I said, well, you need to really check about what happened to you, because that probably caused some sort of weird trauma. And we tend, you probably know this also, like many times in the traditional sphere or in the traditional realm, you have teachers who may beat the students up, but you probably hear stories, right? And they're like, this is better for you. But then, is it? Is it better for the kid to live in trauma for the rest of their life? And I'm completely against it. I actually yelled at a Quran teacher once. I was older, for beating it, for just yelling at a kid, yelling at him in the masjid for not knowing his sabak. I'm like, dude, how would the kid know his sabak? You're yelling at him. Like, we blank out when someone yells at us. You're telling the guy to memorize something just completely fresh. So, a person can't really make normal decisions at that point. You only tend to follow what you've been indoctrinated by. And
And now, viewing back at that phase in your life, do you think, are there any regrets, any things you would change, or do you think it was positive and beneficial for you in the long term?
Everything has its positives. Everything has its negatives. There's no complete positive. There's no complete negative, especially when it comes to humans. Complete positive would be a reflection of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done. But this is not a decision that Allah made. This is a decision that we made, right? So when we make it as humans, we can have positives in it, and we can also have negatives in it. And we're never going to know whether it was positive or negative until we probably die. As for right now, would I send my children in boarding school? Probably never. If I found out my teacher was beating up my kids for not knowing their sabak, I would go and beat them up also. And I do boxing as well, so I don't think that stands a chance. So I wouldn't. A lot of what I'd send my children to go learn Islamic studies that way, probably never. But then again, hey, I might change my mind 20 years from now, right? But as I'm getting older, a lot of these things are opening up to me, and I'm not actually even afraid to talk about this stuff. Really, I'm not.
And what age, if you don't mind me asking, did you start going to the boarding school in the UK, and what age did you graduate? And when you graduated, was it alongside high school?
Well, I started boarding school around 11, 12, and I graduated probably 2021.
Okay, so it was a good 10 years. And so I know you mentioned before the equivalency of your studies at the boarding school was a master's degree. So how does that?
It's the equivalency of any alim program would be a maximum would probably be 4 years post-secondary, or maybe 3 years post-secondary. I wouldn't even count the last year. Maybe I would count the last year, like 4 years, like an undergrad max, not at a master's level at all. Because at a master's level, you're writing research papers. You're writing, you're doing in-depth research. There's a lot more critical thinking involved, and many times in the traditional realm, the critical thinking is not actually promoted. You're not allowed to. So when you're not allowed to do critical thinking, well, that's basically pouring water over an academic master's degree. Some institutes will probably consider it to be a master's degree, but having studied and having like degrees, I wouldn't consider it to be a master's degree at all.
And so how does that work? So you started when you were around 11 or 12, and then you graduated when you were around 2021. So then you started your high school, you completed your schooling up to a high school level there, and then past high school as well, you continued studying Islam to basically a bachelor's level.
Well, I needed to take a few courses to get to the bachelor's level, and that's when I was able to get into getting a master's degree, because you can't get into master's without getting a bachelor's, right? So you have to take a few courses and stuff.
And how was your time like at the institution? And did you come back in the summer to visit parents, or how did it work in terms of your social life, in terms of community?
Are you talking about boarding school?
So is a boarding school Madrasat Ta'lim al-Islam in the UK, or is that different?
It is, yes.
Yeah, so when you were at the boarding school, how is the environment like for students? And
it's a very strict environment, very good, like say good, meaning traditionally it's a good environment, very strict environment. They teach, have classes starting in the morning, classes going until the afternoon. What else would you? You have classes at night where you have to learn your lessons. So it's a very strict environment. It's one of the better institutes actually. There's a lot of institutes. I would classify it one of the better institutes. How? Well, I went to one of the during the final exam, one of the final exams. I looked at one of the final exams of one of the nearby major institutes, and like a Bukhari final exam was as simple as, like, one question was hadith in Arabic, ayatul munafiqi thalatha. You guys know that narration that the signs of hypocrisy is 3.
Yeah.
And then the question was, list those 3. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is a Bukhari final exam in a leading institute of scholars who are going to get up and give lectures in your masjids. As for my institute, where I was studying, we had to write essays. We were writing like 4 or 5 pages on one hadith. Like, what's this hadith? How many rulings are derived from here? What are the different fiqh opinions and stuff like that? So it was like the academics was pretty solid there.
So would you say it produced you as a well-grounded student of knowledge, and how were your fiqh studies and aqidah?
Say that again, because I'm going to answer you in a very twisted way.
Would you say it produced you as a well-grounded student of knowledge?
No, it produced me as a scholar. Now, this is where you might be like, what did you just say, right? Aren't you a little bit confused about what I just said? Why? Because that's what was taught to us. You're scholars now. But don't say that you're scholars. Say that you're students of knowledge. You guys understand? So it's taught to us that no. So basically, as a graduate, we're put on a pedestal. Oh yeah, you guys have sanad now. You're like this. You're going to go to your communities. You're going to be the leaders of your communities. You're ulama now. And the word ilm and ulama is thrown around everywhere. And it's excellent, right? So did it make me a well-grounded student of knowledge? Probably no, not really. We graduated as scholars. And that's how the norm is when we end up graduating. When we end up graduating, it's a typical norm where it's just like, you're a scholar now. Which is something that I completely flip when I teach now. And I tell the students, I make sure the students have a lot of knowledge. They have. My students who graduate with me or study with me, man, they got so much knowledge. I'll tell you guys, none of you guys are students. I'll tell you guys right now, they have a lot of knowledge. But ask any one of them, they don't even feel it. They don't feel they know anything. And for them, if you would ask them, be like, yeah, you know what, students of knowledge, we're just starting our journey. And that's the idea that should have been there. You understand? The idea that should have been there was I'm graduating instead of it superficially, instead of you just having to say, I'm such a student of knowledge, this and that, and I'm a student and I'm beginning my journey, etc. A lot of these institutes need to stop instilling, and this happens with weekend seminars, like whatever seminars you're taking, where you tend to get the students to feel like they know something. Yes, the students know something, but when you start telling them that they're graduating as scholars, it becomes counterproductive, and it creates a major problem in the world. Because all of you, for example, or the community at large, do you guys feel like a person who graduated from madrasas or did the Alamiya course is a scholar? Yes or no?
I would say probably a student of knowledge, not like at the scholar.
You guys are saying that, but I'm talking about the norm.
I think they are viewed upon as scholars, yes.
Perfect. Now, the fact that they're viewed upon as scholars is a major issue. Would you actually go, and then so these people are going to become the imams of your communities, right? Now, you're going to go to them with your marriage issues, with your whatever issues, you have psychological problems, then this and that, and these people, and a lot of them, their educational level is only maybe 3 years post-secondary or 4 years post-secondary. Now, would you go to someone like that for your Jannah and Jahannam? You get my point? So that's the first part of your question was, would you say that you graduated being grounded as a student of knowledge? No, not really. When we graduated, we were told that we were scholars, and the community, like now the Billah used to worship us, like, oh, look at these scholars, they're coming, and they would ask us all kinds of questions, like if I was praying my salah and I didn't touch my ear like this, like is my salah complete or not? And then the scholar would be sitting there like, yeah, you know what, that's fine and that's not fine. These scholars need to learn. Hold on, relax. That's not how it works. Like, it's not as rigid. I wish that people graduated understanding that you're just starting your journey. You're not even a student of knowledge. No, you're not even a student. You've just read the pamphlet, and now you're starting. You're like got up and you're about to make wudu to start your journey, because the journey actually starts after you're done. Now you can go to the second part of your question, Zaid.
So what subjects did you, how did you study fiqh and aqidah and all these?
So we study them in our classes, the typical, teachers teaching the courses. We have books that we study. these books, they're traditional texts. So you have books on grammar, you have books on grammar, you have books on fiqh, you have books on tafsir, and you go through them cover to cover, understand the perspective of what those scholars, what they wrote about, how they think, and align ourselves at that level as well to kind of be a little bit more scholarly per se, so we can understand those texts. Something that a regular person who's not studied, if they didn't pick up those texts, they wouldn't be able to understand at all. But a person's ability to scholarliness is based on how well they can understand that traditional text. Does that make sense? Let me repeat that again. I give you a book. Are you a scholar? Can you open the book and read and understand it? Good, you're a scholar. So but there's a lot of complex points in there, obviously, right? So understanding the terminologies, understanding the concepts, understanding how everything works together, all of that put together creates this, creates a person's ability of being a scholar, how good a person is of a thinker, how a person can actually understand the book and physically bring that book into a person's life, or like practice upon it or whatever. Not really practice, actually, understand. Didn't I warn you guys that you before you talk to me, I'm going to be throwing a lot of curveballs at you guys. But anyways, go on.
So after that, you chose to go to the Hartford Seminary, I believe. So why did you choose that?
That's a long journey. But I went to Hartford just to learn about interfaith, Christianity, Judaism, etc., and to become more acquainted with and more grounded in religion, more grounded in religious studies, whether Islamic studies or Christian studies, Jewish studies, etc.
So how was the learning environment there, would you say?
It's very typical Western university, like you guys are in university as well. So it'd be very similar to that. Teachers teaching, you have graduate seminars, so you have like 5 or 10 students in the class, you have a book you got to read, or you have discussion, but it's not traditional. So a traditional aspect of it is we have a traditional text and you read it and you master it and you perfect it, right? The academic realm is a little more different. The academic realm would be reading more, sometimes even reading a classical text, or sometimes reading like a later text and analyzing it and being critically analyzing it. So that the difference in Western academia would be to question what you're reading, versus the tradition would be to understand what you're reading.
So how do you think that's, is it more beneficial or less beneficial, or are they different things that
It's
both need to be done?
It really depends on the person. Everyone is different. If someone's into critical thinking, then they'll appreciate this approach. If someone's not into critical thinking, they probably want to stick to the tradition. It depends what you are, what level of education you want to be at. One is not better than the other. They're mutually exclusive. One's an apple, one's an orange. I happen to eat both.
So which one is more beneficial for students of knowledge?
At a beginner, you can't critique something until you know it. So therefore, know it first before critiquing it. You understand? So if you want to study Islamic studies, study it from a traditional point of view, and complete it. And then after that, if you want to study further, then go ahead and look at it from an academic point of view. But you shouldn't go the other way around, because when you go the other way around, you forget. Many people can forget about the basics of the tradition. It's like this. It's like studying philosophy and then studying Tawheed. like Western philosophy, where you don't complete all of philosophy, you study half of it, which makes you an atheist, and then studying Tawheed, but you already have all the arguments of being an atheist now, right? So it won't work compared to doing it the other way around. Study Tawheed, master it, and then after that, go this way. So the progression has to be a particular way, not the other way.
What was your main subject in the Hartford Seminary?
It really depends. I specialized in a lot of different areas. So, for example, I also one of my favorite courses that I took was actually no favorite course I took. A few historical courses that I've taken, like this Islamic theology was a really nice course that I took. That was actually one of my favorite courses. I like that a lot. Studying the Islamic theology. I teach a similar course at Critical Loyalty with my own twists and turns on it, but it's basically Islamic theology of the Golden Ages, like from the time of the Prophet all the way till maybe Ibn Taymiyyah's time.
So did you take in any traditional studies on the side while you were there?
I didn't need to because I was a traditional scholar, right? Like I was giving ijazas to the teachers there, like Quran. I remember sitting in class and the teacher would be like I'd be sitting in class and just conversation going on, academic conversation, and the teacher would be like, Shaykh Uthman, is it Maghrib time yet? I'd be like, it's still 5 minutes. I'd be like, okay, cool. And then it'd be like prayer time, and they'd be like, push me to lead prayer. So yeah, I didn't need to because I had already studied, like I was a traditional scholar. I had all my ijazas in my hand, right? I had everything already on me.
Were the teachers Muslim or a combination?
No, they were most of them were Muslim. Most of them were Muslim. I don't know how it is now. Again, this was a while back, but yeah, most of them are Muslim. Yeah.
As you progress in your journey, how has your mindset developed with regards to the Islamic studies that you've gotten over time?
I like that question. That's a really good question. Your mindset develop. One is imagine someone who doesn't have children try to tell you how it feels like to have children. Okay, another example here. Any of you, the three of you, are any of you married? No. Okay. So imagine you giving someone advice on marriage. So it becomes weird, right? As time progresses, a lot of people can have opinions. A lot of people can have ideas and concepts and whatever ideologies and stuff like that. But as time progresses, when you get married, when you get children, simple marriage and children, like that's the main thing. You can tend to change a lot of perspectives, a lot of ideas as well. Because I'll give you an example. Have you studied a little bit of fiqh, maybe a little bit? And when you studied the fiqh of Hajj, you're supposed to go to Muzdalifah after Maghrib, right? You go to Muzdalifah after Maghrib, and you pray Maghrib and Isha in Muzdalifah. But that's actually not what happens when you go for Hajj. People after they pray, like they're in Arafah, they pray Maghrib and Isha in Muzdalifah, but they let the sun set and they're just waiting in Arafah because the amount of people that are there, the big crowd that's over there. It's actually not feasible to go to Muzdalifah right after Maghrib. You've got to wait a little bit before you go. What I'm trying to say is progression of mindset and ideologies and just perspective changes as you get older. As you get older, as you get married, as you start to realize life and you start to talk to people and you start to appreciate and understand different people, start broadening your horizons, then what that does is it tends to open up a lot of perspective. So this perspective is interesting because something may be allowed for you, not allowed for me, because just based on the fact that your mind hasn't progressed to that level versus mine has, or my mind hasn't progressed to that level versus your mind has. For example, I less in Banff, but in Jasper, I do a lot of mountain climbing. You guys go to Banff a lot, probably. So, but less in Banff, more in Jasper. I do a lot of mountain climbing. Like I climbed the Whistler Mountain as well. So, like straight from the bottom up. So imagine you're on top of the mountain and you saw everything. You climbed the whole mountain, and then someone on the bottom of the mountain is trying to tell you how it feels like to climb the mountain. They're like, it's such a hard climb. You're like, buddy, you haven't climbed the mountain, so you just stay quiet, keep it to yourself. So progression happens with knowledge. You have to keep on studying, keep on reading the Quran, keep on understanding the Sunnah. And the more you do it, the more you have to. As a student of knowledge, I always encourage all the students to ask why. Why are you doing this for? Why do you, like, for example, why are you praying like this? Why are you doing this? You already are going to pray 4 rakat dhuhr, but ask yourself a question, why? And start asking the whys for everything. And what the whys does, when you're asking why this, it sifts out a lot of things that weren't supposed to be there. And it consolidates a lot of things that were actually supposed to be there. It makes you do things that were actually supposed to be there that you weren't doing in the first place. And what this does is it creates it tends to make your own knowledge evolve, because now someone can come up to you and ask you a question who's not even Muslim, maybe, or they can be Muslim, and they'll ask you a question, and you're going to be able to give a way better response to them than someone who's just does it as just a movement. Oh, I'm praying salah, I do ruku, I do sajda, etc. Right? So this sort of evolution, or this sort of evolving of a person's mind, happens as life progresses and as you keep connecting yourself with the Quran, honestly, because the Quran is wisdom, and you keep connecting yourself with the Quran, your brain just expands like it's no one's business. And when your brain expands, you start to realize you're climbing the mountain. And when you realize that you're climbing the mountain, well, you've reached the summit of one mountain and everyone else is still on the bottom. And the people on the bottom are preaching to one another how it is to climb the mountain, but they've never climbed it. So when you're at that level who's actually climbed the mountain, you guys understand the analogy? When you're at the level who's actually someone you physically walk the whole path, and you see someone telling other people about how it actually is, you're not going to argue with them. It's like a kindergarten kid trying to tell you how it feels like getting a PhD. You're like, mashallah, good for you. Pinch their cheeks, tap them on the head, right? Like that's basically the analogy. There's the more you progress, there's advices that anyone who's been through that journey can give, but besides that, that's how the evolution happens, moving more into the world. There's a few points that I can actually give you guys, which would be really nice. Number 1, connect with nature. Connect with nature. We are nature, right? So connecting with nature, it'll open your brain up. And you guys are in Calgary, so you guys are right next to the mountains. It's good for you guys. Connect with nature. That'll open your brain up big time. If someone claims to say that they are representing the religion of Islam, but they don't connect with nature, I will not talk to them. I can't, because you don't connect with nature. The Quran instructs us to connect with nature, right? The Quran says, go look at the moon, look at the night and the day and the mountains and the trees. And that's direct reflection of what the Quran is talking about. That's the first thing, is connecting with nature. Number 2 is keep reading the Quran, because the Quran will give you that perspective. And the third is look for what the Prophet did, recognize that he was perfect, and do it. And you'll realize your life is going to be chill. You'll be so happy. The more I've done that, the more my brain has expanded to a limit that my eyes or my ears, my regular senses will never be able to appreciate at all.
So, how would you recommend the upcoming generation, such as us, views on Islamic studies, and how should we study them exactly?
A good one good thing that you guys can do, like upcoming generation, is start to find substance in what you do. Start to find substance in what you do. On the day of judgment, your deeds are going to be weighed. It'll be a scale. Balanced. Did you live a balanced life? There's always going to be substance in it. And connect yourself with institutes or scholars or personalities that would give you that substance, because we can learn it as much and do whatever it is we need to do. But when we start to gain substance, we start to appreciate. The one thing that I've noticed with the younger community is that we've made the religion of Islam extremely ritualistic. So we need to come out of that ritualistic aspect of the religion of Islam, and we need to actually be Muslim and follow Islam as the way. And this means understanding why we're doing everything that we're doing that we claim that it is Islam. Does that make sense? A little bit. Why? So for example, you're going to the masjid. Why are you going to the masjid? It can be a simple answer and it can be a complicated answer. But whatever the answer is, make sure you have that. Don't make the religion completely superficial and fluffy, like superficial and just nothing. There's no substance behind it. It's time for dhuhr. Stand up and remember that now it's time for you to focus and turn to Allah and make your 4 rak'ah. And then raise your hands, focus, do your whole salam, move on with your life, right? But what you've done is you've brought your prayer in, the time came, you prayed, and then you continue doing what you were doing. When we remove substance from our religion, it becomes very superficial. Superficial religion is not what the Prophet ﷺ was bringing to the people. Because if someone's doing something in a superficial manner, you can literally convince them otherwise and they're going to stop doing it. Does that make sense? They'll stop doing it. They'll be like, oh yeah. But if someone understands the substance behind it, you can literally drop a mountain on their head and they're going to keep doing it. It's like a child. A child knows that that's my parent. There's substance behind that. So therefore, it doesn't matter what it is, the child's always going to go back to the parent. A baby, right? You can put anything in the middle. They're always going to head back to where they come from. When we've lost that connection, or when we've lost that understanding of Allah, and when we forgot about Allah, and we made religion very fluffy and superficial, we didn't connect back to Allah anymore. We weren't that child going back to the parent no more. We were just a person just doing. I'm just doing. Why are you praying dhuhr for? Because it's farz, I have to, versus I'm praying because the Prophet prayed it. I'm praying because Allah told me to pray it. It's a different mindset. And this is the upcoming generation. If there's some advices that I can give to the upcoming youth, it would basically be along those lines. Number one, connect with nature and understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran. Go back to what the Sunnah is talking about. And that's literally all you need. That's basically all you need. You don't need anything more than that. There's no more Islamic studies, or there's nothing more Islamic studies that can actually be taught to you than you can teach yourself by just putting substance in your worship. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so Shaykh Uthman, to sort of dissect this a tiny bit more, would you say putting substance in our actions, in our studies, etc., is about having the right intention, and that's where the hadith إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ comes in, where actions should have a strong intention behind them?
It's possible, and that's something I need to think about. I never thought about that. But substance can have putting substance in it, putting substance in your ibadat or your worships or anything that you're doing, it requires perspective. And إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, if you're asking me, what can that hadith fit into that? I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that. I don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna have to think about it. It's not something that crossed my mind. Even right now, I'm trying to connect the dots, but I can't. But it's possible. If that makes sense to you, that all actions are based on their intentions, that can work. It fits. I need to put that into practice myself for a few days, and which I'll do. Because now that you said that to me, hold on, let me write this down in my to-do list. Yes, I'm a weirdo, but I do weird things like this. Let me. And now, what I'm going to think about it. And as I'm going to think about it, I'm going to see whether this hadith would fit. If it fits with you, good. I have to see if it fits with me. But for me, I never thought about substance through this anyway. So, thank you.
So Shaykh Uthman, when it comes to developing substance in our acts of worship, so I know you mentioned it's not just about doing it because you have to do it. It's not like, I know like the parents tell their kids, you have to do it or you'll go to for example, you'll go to Jahannam, for example, or do this so you can go to Jannah. Do you think there's something we might be missing when it comes to connecting with Allah? As in, is there something more? I know this might be a bit of a philosophical question, or but like, what should our intention be when striving towards Allah? Is it Jannah and Jahannam? That's in the Quran. But do you think there's something more with regards to developing a love for Allah, seeking His pleasure, worshipping Him because He deserves to be worshipped? Or how should we make sense of all the different intentions we could have when worshipping Allah?
Your primary intention should be, I'm doing it because Allah told me to do it. Let me give you an example here. I said this in Fort Mac. I was giving a conference at Fort McMurray a few years back, and I gave the example. Who created the world? Allah created the world. We all know this. Imagine this world to be a board game. Cool? Imagine this world as a big board game. And we have the rules of how to play this board game. You buy like whatever, it could be anything. I have this board game upstairs and I still don't understand how to do it because they didn't write the rules properly. But then you have the rules. Those rules are there. Now we're supposed to follow those rules and play the board game according to that. Yeah. Then you have a person who says, let me show you how to follow those rules. So that someone comes up and says, okay, watch me play the game. So now you're watching, you're like, okay, this person did this, and then you learn what those rules are saying based on what this person is telling you to do. Right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created this world. He gave us the rules of how to live our life in this world, which is, what is it?
The Quran and Sunnah.
The Quran. This is the Quran. Then not the Sunnah. He gave us the Quran. And then He gave us the person who's going to play the game. Who's going to tell us, this is how you follow the rules, which is the Prophet ﷺ and his practice. So if we want to be successful, meaning if we want to win the game, what's the only way to win the game? Follow the rules. But not the rules that anyone else made up. Because look, if Allah created the world, okay, just think of an example of a board game. You have a board game, and I created the board game. I put a bunch of rules there, and Yahya, you come up and you're like, you know what? It's his board game, but I'm going to make my own rules for it. It doesn't make any sense. You get my point now, right?
Yeah.
The point over here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world, put us in this world, and we're living this world. It's up to us to follow the rules. But the only way to follow those rules is how the Prophet did it, because he was the example for us. And that's how you create substance. So I don't need to ritualistically just do it. If you understand that you're progressing and you're living your life because of Allah created us, put us here, that's one thing. But now you have an individual who's playing this board game and decides, well, you need to go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're just like, 1, I don't know, maybe I'll just go to 15. Well, you can't do that. Well, yeah, I can do that. But what happens if the person went to 15? The whole system gets messed up, right? Isn't it true? Maybe you're playing a game.
Yeah.
Look at someone, you're playing checkers and you go straight instead of crooked. You just you messed up the whole system. The whole thing gets messed up. And that's what we've done in the world. What humans have done in the world when we've gone against the system that Allah created, when we've stopped following the rules, then we created this weird anomaly that we just need to catch up now. Forget catch up, like trace back to bring the person who's on number 15 back to number 4, because buddy, you're on 4. You have to go to 5, not to 15. And so then when we have to pray Dhuhr or Asr or Maghrib, well, we're praying because Allah told us to pray. And that's your primary point. And that's how everyone should do it. Allah told me to pray. Why? I don't know. He just said to pray. That's just the rules. Okay, cool. Sami'na wa ata'na. Right? But then after that, as you do more of this, you keep playing this game. You're getting more higher, older and older and older. As you keep playing this game, living your life in this world, you're going to start to ask those questions. So start to ask those questions. I wonder why. And Ibrahim alayhi salam did that as well. He believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates life and death, but he said, show me. لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. Peace of my mind. But he was already a prophet, wasn't he? In other words, he had that basics down. And then only after that, when لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي takes place, when he had to cut up those birds and call them back, then it made so much sense to him. It wasn't like he was questioning or he's going to leave it. He understood the basics. I'm following. I'm going to go from 4 to 5. But Ya Allah, I need to know, why can't I go to 15 though? So Allah showed him why he can't go to 15. Oh, okay, makes sense now. I'm going to go to 5. Does that make sense? A philosophical question gets a philosophical answer.